Today we're going to be talking about fat and why it is both an important part of your diet but also something that really benefits from monitoring. Fat is one of those things that can really drive people a little off course with their diet, and that can even happen with healthy fats. And we talked about this a little bit with carbs, but fats tend to be even more of an issue in this area. And the area I'm referring to is thinking of something as healthy and then discounting it so you don't pay attention to how much you're consuming, or maybe you're paying attention but it's still really easy to underestimate how much you're taking in. So when it comes to fat, you want to make sure that your numbers are calculated well. So let's use the example of 1,500 calories, because that's a very, very common number that I see a lot of women really successful with in terms of calories. And it's a nice round number to use for a lot of reasons. So if you've been following along with the protein and the carbohydrates, let's use that 1,500 calorie goal to break down a macro split that would really help a lot of women be very successful with weight loss. So let's say that's your goal. That means that if you do a 30% protein, that's 30% of your calories. What that ends up being is 110 grams of protein. So that's your protein goal. Let's say that carbohydrates, let's say you want to do a 40% carbohydrate goal. That's pretty reasonable, because what that's going to end up being is 150 grams of carbohydrates. And we'll talk about this in a second. But if you want to go lower carb, probably fat will come up a little bit to balance it out. We're going to get to that. So let's say that is 1,500 calorie goal. Out of that, we're talking about 110 grams of protein. That's 440 calories of protein. 150 grams of carbohydrates. That's 600 calories of carbohydrates. Now, both protein and carbohydrates are 4 calories per gram. That means that every time you have a gram of protein, you're taking in 4 calories. Same for carbs. Fat is a unique category. It's the third macro. It's also the biggest macro in the sense that it comes in a very small package but packs a lot of calories. 1 gram of fat is 9 calories, which means it is more than double the calories per gram than protein or carbohydrates. And it's very significant because it means that the dosage of your fat needs to be lower than the other two when it comes to the grams. So again, 110 grams of protein, 150 grams of carbohydrates. In that diet, what's left over is 51 grams of fat. And that's like the perfect split in terms of if you're working with 1,500 calories. If you wanted to flip carbs and fat a little, just to make carbs lower, fat a little higher, you can do that. You would just make it 40% fat and 30% carbs instead of the other way around. So that would end up being 112 grams of carbohydrates, which would be significantly more challenging to moderate carbohydrates to that level. But on the flip side, you would have 67 grams of fat to play with, which is easier to moderate. And both of those goals would get you to 1,500 calories per day. So fat is one of those things where, just like carbs, we can separate things into good fats and bad fats. And what you really want to focus on is not overall, like you never eat cholesterol or you never eat saturated fat. It's just more about what's your daily routine like and what are some of your basic guidelines in terms of numbers. So the first thing I want to look at in broad strokes is the good fats and bad fats spectrum. And in general, I like to see clients hit their fat goals using things like whole eggs, avocado, olive oil, seeds, fatty fish, etc. The things that when you think of healthy fat, those are the things that you think of. Chia seeds, flax seeds, omega-3s, etc. The things that are good for your brain, all of that good stuff. And then the bad fats are typically going to be things that you're finding in junk food, candy, cake, brownies, etc. But I will also say that even in healthier foods, let's say like a full fat yogurt, I do like to see people regulate their intake of fat from saturated fat sources, even if it's from a healthy source. And in general, this can vary from person to person, but I would say try to keep cholesterol overall in a moderate range unless your doctor has told you that you need to be on a very low cholesterol diet. And then similarly with saturated fat, for most women, 10, 15 grams of saturated fat a day is plenty. And more than that, your saturated fat is getting higher, probably higher than you really need, higher than you need for health, etc. So that 10 to 15 number is a great number to regulate, because that means that you'll watch your intake of full fat foods, because most of them do have saturated fat. So typically what I tell people to do is, when it comes to plant-based fats, have not as much as you want, like moderate it, use the right serving size, but don't worry about it as much. And we'll talk about serving sizes in a minute. But then when it comes to more animal-based fats, do be quite conservative, do be more observant, because every one of those animal-based full-fat products is going to convey a lot of saturated fat specifically. So I often err on the side of get a part skim or a skim product, because in the United States, most of us get plenty of fat in our diet. Most of us are not getting enough fat. So if you're getting it plenty through the plant sources, then you can really afford and would probably benefit from doing that fat-free Greek yogurt, the skim milk, like part skim cheeses. My little cheat on the cheeses, like my cheat sheet, is sometimes don't bother with the cheese, because in terms of picking a low fat or a no fat, because flavor is so affected that sometimes it's not worth it. Like I get full fat feta because I'm not going to use that much feta anyway, but it just tastes like garbage going fat free. It's like I wouldn't even, like, turns my stomach almost. Whereas like with the common ingredients of like a smoothie, for example, which I'm eating a large serving every day, yogurt and milk, I do get the skim versions, because to me it is worth it to limit that amount of saturated fat I'm taking in per day. So the most important thing to regulate in terms of serving size is especially the fats that you think of as healthy. They're harder to regulate, and often because they have kind of soupy, thin consistencies, which means that our eyeballing skills are terrible when it comes to fat. So for example, olive oil, of course, it's really good for you on many levels. However, it's almost impossible to eyeball olive oil. Like, you're putting it on a salad, and how could you possibly know how much you're putting on unless, for example, you have it in a sprayer, so 4 sprays is how much you use. So I do recommend, especially if you're focusing on fat loss, weight loss, pour things into a tablespoon. It might be a little tedious, but 1 tablespoon is usually the serving size for these plant-based fats. Peanut butter, if you want to make it more of like a meal size, it's going to be 2 tablespoons. But generally, and this is true for most fats, 1 tablespoon is about 100 calories. And let's say that your goal is 1,500 calories, to go back to that kind of magic round number. 100 calories makes a big difference. That's a big percentage of your diet, of your whole day. So if you're making a salad at night and you're not, or let's sit on the flip side, let's say you are observing portion sizes really well, you're using your tablespoon. If you have, let's say an ounce of feta, a tablespoon of olive oil, and a tablespoon of seeds, you are probably at about 300 extra calories for that salad. Now, is there anything wrong with that? Of course not. However, what often happens is that, because this is that discounting thing, because it's all kind of healthy, whole foods, it's easy to pretend like that 300 calories doesn't exist, or to way underestimate it. So you're having maybe like a main course and a salad, and the whole meal together ends up being like 800 calories. And if you're going to use sources of healthy fats in like an abundant and generous way, then I say make that the focus of the meal. Don't make it a side. Have a salad with some lean chicken breast, and then go not crazy, but use healthy fats with an abundant attitude. Have that olive oil, the cheese, the nuts, some avocado, whatever you're gonna do, but that is the main bulk of the calories in the meal, and you're very aware of it. But you're probably building like a 500 calorie salad. It's not nothing just because it's salad and just because they're healthy fats. So that's an area where I see people trip up, is the discounting phenomenon of not paying attention or underestimating just because something is a healthy fat. And then the way it adds up ends up being a huge percentage of your calories. And you don't know. So, it ends up being, if your goal is 1,500, maybe you're taking in 1,800 or 1,900 calories a day. Nothing wrong with that, unless your goal was to be in a caloric deficit at 1,500 calories. And that is exactly the spot where I see a lot of women get stuck, as they're eating very healthfully. They feel like they're really sticking with kind of an approved list of foods. They're eating salads, they're eating their whole foods, they're eating their whole grains, they're eating plenty of protein, but they're just stuck and they're not losing any more weight. And once we investigate, what I often find is that it's because they're not eating at the right deficit level for them. They're eating maybe 500 calories more, which means they are in maintenance. They are not in a fat loss mode. They're eating very healthfully and it's good for them, but they're not going to lose weight. They're going to maintain their weight. So if you feel like you're stuck in a fat loss or weight loss plateau, I do encourage people, let's do the protein first, let's get carbohydrates under control. But then if you're still stuck, you might find that the culprit is fat once you really start observing it and paying attention to both the portion sizes and how things add up. So observation and planning is everything in this case. You really don't want to discount it. So do your best every day to get your fat through plant sources, maybe limit it in terms of animal sources, you choose lower fat or skim options, choose leaner cuts of meat, etc. But then keep your eye on the whole picture too. Use a tablespoon, use a quarter measure cup for things like cheese. Really get used to using the right serving sizes of things and then track to see how it adds up. And then you'll know what numbers you're working with, and it's an estimate still, but you're probably pretty close compared to if you didn't track at all. And when it comes to fat, because it's so important for brain health, healthy skin, healthy hair, mood, etc., we don't want to go too low. So I never like to see people go below 50 grams a day, regardless of what their calorie level is. I want to see a baseline amount of fat that's contributing to whole person health. But on the flip side, my experience is most people aren't getting that enough. Most people are getting too much. They just need to change the quality of it and then bring the amount down a little bit. So try that out this week. See if you can observe the sources of your intake of fat and if you can change the quality and the amount in a way that feels good to you.